So hello everyone, we will start this webinar on the AOP Knowledge Base and AOP developing tips. I'm Nathalie Delrue from the OECD Secretariat, and I'm glad to welcome you to this third webinar on AOPs organized by the OECD. So this webinar is the third one of a series of three. The first webinar was an introduction to the AOP framework as a collaborative tool. It aimed at explaining why we are developing AOPs and what are the opportunities for collaboration in AOP development. The second and third webinars are directed to scientists who wish to collaborate in the AOP development efforts, providing practical guidance. So the second webinar focused on the importance of weight of evidence in the process of developing AOPs and understanding why quantitative AOPs are developed. And this third webinar will focus on the core applications of information and telecommunication technologies that were built to support AOP development, management, and dissemination. It will focus mainly on the AOP knowledge base, but also other applications that are being developed will be described. Tools and technical tips to facilitate scientific knowledge assembling and evaluation will also be presented. I would like to welcome our three speakers today, Clemens Wittwehr, Dan Villeneuve, and Holly Mortensen. Clemens Wittwehr works for the European Commission's Joint Research Center in Ispra, Italy, where he's leader of the Protection of Animals Used for Scientific Purposes project. He is the AOP-KB group leader reporting to the OECD and is currently busy managing the maintenance of the current wiki, which is one of the core modules of the AOP knowledge base. And he's also setting up the project to create the next wiki version. He's the person you should contact if you have creative ideas on what features should be improved or added with the wiki. And for the time being, he will provide an introduction on the AOP knowledge base. Dan Villeneuve is a research toxicologist at the US EPA Center for Computational Toxicology and Exposure. He has been engaged in AOP research and development for over 10 years, and he's actively involved in the OECD AOP development program. He has contributed to many expert workshops focused on AOPs and their applications. He has personally authored or co-authored over 15 AOPs described in the AOP Wiki, and has provided AOP-related trainings to a wide range of international stakeholders. He will present technical tips in order to making the AOP-KB entries easy and clear. Holly Mortensen has worked at the EPA's National Center for Computational Toxicology and at the National Health and Environmental Effects Research Laboratory. She is now with the US EPA, and her current research focuses on computational approaches to characterizing human susceptibility in relation to adverse outcome pathways of toxicological interest, including the development of the EPA Adverse Outcome Pathway Database, which she will present in her talk about ways to retrieve information from databases and other AOP tools. So during the webinar, participants are invited to send questions via the chat box. So please, if you have questions or comments, send them to myself or to everyone as you wish to. And the speakers at the end of the webinar will address some of the questions received. We may not have time to discuss all of them, but you are welcome to follow up with the Secretariat with any other question or need for clarification you may have. Another few technical points before we start. Because of the large number of participants, all participants are muted, and you are requested not to unmute yourselves during the course of the webinar in order to ensure a good quality of the sound. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our public website within the next few days. So with this, I will pass it over to Clemens, who will give an introduction on the AOP Knowledge Base.
Thank you, Nathalie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present a quick overview of the AOP concept, really only a few slides, and then we go in the middle of things by talking about the AOP-KB and the AOP Wiki. So I'm trying to share my desktop now with you. So let's start. Well, in order to visualize a little bit what is an AOP actually and how do we treat knowledge in the AOP, let's create a little analogy with a world that every one of us knows, meaning eating fish and eating sushi. So imagine you have this big lake of wisdom and knowledge, and you want to get those parts of knowledge out of this lake that suit your needs. So you need guys and people who are fishing the right parts of the knowledge out of this huge lake. So the fish will be collected and they are sorted into nice compartmentalized sushi boxes. And these sushi boxes are much more, let's say, understandable and eatable than the big chaotic lake. So the knowledge consumers can just enjoy the parts that they need, and the information overload is by the knowledge providing crowd sorted into the curated knowledge, and the knowledge consuming crowd can much more easily digest what's in the lake. And obviously, this can only work when a central authority governs the process of selecting and curating the knowledge in these boxes. The information overload, when we go back, away from the analogy, the information overload is obviously the wealth and the tsunami of scientific literature that every one of us has to deal with. The curated knowledge, that's the AOP-KB about which we will talk, and the knowledge consuming crowd, that's you, for who we try to make the digestion of the scientific literature more easier. And the volunteers are the ones who have decided to actively participate in the AOP enterprise and to make sure that the chaotic knowledge is sorted and curated. And the central authority, well, that's the OECD, because we decided that we place this central authority at the very top level, and I think the OECD is really doing a good job making sure that the knowledge is sorted and displayed correctly. So what we are now talking about mostly in this seminar, or at least in my talk, is what is this curated knowledge all about? What is the AOP-KB all about? And we try to answer a series of questions. Where do I find AOPs in real life? What is an AOP in real life? What can I actually do with an AOP in real life? And where do I get more information? So where do I get more information? Obviously in the AOP Knowledge Base. The AOP Knowledge Base consists of three main modules. It's the eAOP portal, and it's the main entry point for the AOP-KB. So if you want to get a complete overview of what's going on in the AOP-KB IT area, then use this link. The main two modules that are accessible via the eAOP portal are the Adverse Outcome Pathway Wiki, which is the entry-level module for evaluating an AOP scientific evidence. And it's the default go-to module for all qualitative AOPs. So if you have a text description, a mostly text description of your AOP, of the scientific evidence underpinning your AOP, then the AOP Wiki is the way to enter it and also to look for it. The other module, sorry, is the Effectopedia, which captures quantitative information and which also has a visual interface, a graphical interface. Then there are third-party modules which are closely associated to the AOP knowledge base. one of them being the AOP Explorer, which tries to establish AOP networks out of the AOP knowledge stored in the AOP Knowledge Base. Then we have the AOP-DB, which is will be on the web this summer, and about which Holly will speak in her talk. And then we have the intermediate effects database, which will concentrate on actual real chemical information, dealing or covering key event information. So when a chemical triggers a key event in an AOP, that information should go into the intermediate effects database. So that is an overview of what the AOP knowledge base is all about. We will concentrate in this presentation on the lower, on the left-hand bottom box, meaning the AOP Wiki. By the way, all these tools can talk to each other via a format that we have developed and published called the AOP XML. So if information is exchanged between the wiki and the AOP-DB, or the wiki and Effectopedia, all these modules talk to each other by using the AOP XML format. Which also means that if you want to develop your own homegrown AOP development tool, then feel free to do so, as long as you comply to the AOP XML format in your export interface or import interface. Nothing speaks against that. So where do I find AOPs in real life? The answer is in the AOP Knowledge Base Wiki, which can be accessed with this direct link. So what does the AOP Wiki look like? I guess most of you have already accessed it. The main page of the AOP Wiki has the usual elements like announcements, welcoming messages, and links that lead to the AOPs, to the key events, and to the key event relationships, and obviously also a content box. What is an AOP in real life? An AOP is nothing more, nothing less than a document or a series of linked documents in the wiki. So that is a typical AOP page. If you look for an AOP at one of the more than 200 AOPs in the wiki, they will all look the same. They will all follow the same template. Section 1, title, Section 2, author, Section 3, status, and so on and so on. Obviously, while much of the information can be stored on the main page, title, author, status, abstract, and so on, there is information that would not fit into the scheme or into the template of the main page. So we decided that some of the elements of an AOP get treated a little bit differently, meaning we don't store the information in the main page, but we create linked pages, additional pages to the main page, which are obviously accessible very easily via clickable hyperlinks. And that means the molecular initiating event page, all the key event pages, and also the adverse outcome page are pages that are additional and linked to the main page. Same applies to the key event relationship pages and to certain other elements. What can you then do with an AOP in real life? What can you do with this series of documents in the wiki? You can obviously view them online or print them, create a PDF. You can comment on them. That's a very useful feature, which we hope that this series of webinars will lead to a situation where many more people comment on the current wiki, on the current AOPs. You can even edit and improve AOPs, and that is at the core of the crowdsourcing paradigm that we try to make more popular, meaning that if you have ideas concerning an existing AOP that goes beyond mere commenting, then do feel free to edit the existing knowledge. Obviously, you need to have author rights for that, but we will come to that in a minute. And you can even review AOPs, and we come to the review process in a minute. So how can you access the AOP Wiki? Well, read access, totally straightforward. It's open to anyone, no account required, totally free of charge. And the technology of the wiki is also made in a way that it doesn't put let's say, exaggerated resource requirements on your PC or on your internet connection. It's really very straightforward. Address we already know, aopwiki.org. If you want to comment, if you want to leave your trace or your knowledge about the knowledge that we have collected, then you can create an account. It's very easy. There is a little icon on the main page of the wiki called Sign Up. If you click that, then you are asked a very few simple questions. You have to give an email address, which will then be your user account, and you will get a mail to that email account that you have to confirm. So no one will, actually there is no human interaction in that. It's just to make sure that we are not flooded with fake accounts. But from that moment on, you are an AOP-KB user and you can leave comments. If you want to go a step further, meaning you want to author, edit, or insert, edit an existing or insert a new AOP, then it gets a bit more formal, let's say. You use the same account that you have already created before, so your commenting account. You create a short document, Word document, PDF document, in which you describe what kind of activity you plan to do, which kind of AOP you want to enter, and then you submit that to the appropriate links provided in on the web page of the Society for the Advancement of AOPs. So the SAOP is the organization that you should go to when you want to edit or add stuff to the wiki. If you want to become even an official reviewer, meaning if you want to promote AOPs or want to be part of the process which promotes AOPs in their life cycle, then you can become a reviewer and you can volunteer and just tell any one of us, Nathalie, me, or Dan, or Holly, that you want to become a volunteer in the review process. Would be very much appreciated. And then we have the real hardcore wiki users. We call them the gardeners because they have to weed out certain stuff in the wiki. You can imagine that in a crowdsourcing endeavor, many things are started but not completed, are left alone for a long time, and these gardeners have to make sure that the stuff that we present in the wiki always looks fresh and appealing. So these people monitor the use of the vocabulary and the ontologies and are really very, very deep into the process. So these are the four things that you can do. Where do we get more information? Obviously on the OECD website. If you have more questions, there are many guidelines, handbooks, vademecums on the OECD website on how to enter an AOP or what the theoretical background of the AOP framework. The URL of the OECD website is a bit complicated, so I suggest you just Google OECD AOPs and you will definitely arrive at the right page immediately. So if we look at the AOP lifecycle for a moment, let's look at the kingdom of AOPs like a triangle. So there are the AOPs that are not on the OECD work program. Anyone who has an SAOP authorized user access can enter an AOP into the wiki. So you don't need to it's not even necessary that you contact the OECD before you enter an AOP into the wiki. You just apply for access at the SAOP, and when your one-page description makes halfway sense, and practically all of them do, all of those we received so far, then you will get right access. You just start editing your AOP. So if you want to get a little bit more serious, meaning that you want to get your AOP on the OECD work program, so you want to make the AOP visible to the guys at OECD who manage the AOP framework, then this can be easily achieved by applying at the OECD for being put on the work program. So either you do that while you have already an AOP in the lower level, and you then get your AOP promoted into an OECD status, or you directly apply at the OECD and directly enter your AOP into the wiki. So those AOPs who have matured from not on the OECD work program to the OECD work program, and on the one hand, and those who are created only at the moment where your AOP is already on the OECD work program, are treated the same way. Once they have arrived at this level, they are all equal. So next step is obviously to get even more visibility and even more matureness, that the ECMAST, which is the subgroup at OECD dealing with the AOP framework, gives the green light for further steps. So all the AOPs are looked at closely, and if the AOP author apply for being, let's say, looked at more closely, then the ECMAST check will happen, meaning the ECMAST takes a closer look at selected AOPs, and you can see that as a first reality check in to which extent the AOP conforms to the rules laid out in the different guidances and handbooks. So once this happens, the AOPs get bigger, I mean, in importance, and these AOPs are then ready for the final stage. I must always say, if the author so wishes. If the author wants to stop at that stage, nothing prevents him from saying, okay, I'm happy with that. But obviously, if an AOP author has reached that stage already, he will obviously be willing to go the last mile, meaning turning his AOP from an ECMAST checked AOP into an adopted and endorsed AOP. And that's external review process, and that's the review, the circle of reviews where we are obviously looking for volunteers. I mean, people who are experts in the field are more than welcome to volunteer to also not only add AOP knowledge but also review existing AOP knowledge, and that is then the final life stage of an AOP. These AOPs really have high visibility. They are put on in a special publication format on the OECD website. The OECD has even created a new series of publications dedicated to these externally reviewed AOPs. So, speaking of numbers, there are currently 268 AOPs in the wiki. 210 of them are what we call having no OECD status, meaning these are AOPs that have gone into the wiki via the SAOP gate on the lowest level. But we have already 22 AOPs with OECD status, 20 AOPs under review by ECMAST, and 16 have reached the last final step in their life cycle, meaning they are mature or were considered mature enough to be fully endorsed AOPs and have been published in the series, in the publication series I mentioned at the OECD. Concerning the users, there are currently a little bit more than 1,000 registered users in the wiki, and 163 of them are fully fledged authors. So these people can really add stuff into the wiki, and that these numbers are growing every day. So maybe one last slide on what does that mean now in context. I mean, the AOP-KB alone is interesting because it provides theoretical knowledge about events where biology goes wrong or biology is disturbed. But can that potentially improve chemical safety assessment? So if we look at this triangle between chemicals, test methods and adverse outcome pathways, then obviously a chemical undergoes a test following a certain test method, ideally a non-animal test methods. That's the reason why this icon here doesn't show any test animals. So with these test methods, you obviously test whether your chemical triggers a certain organ response following the scientific knowledge in an adverse outcome pathway. Or maybe it triggers a cellular response, or maybe the chemical does not trigger a tissue response, or the test is inconclusive whether there is a molecular interaction, or it does not trigger an organelle response. So this can we call it fingerprint of a chemical based on the knowledge codified in an adverse outcome pathway, can then be saved in a dedicated format called OECD Harmonized Template 201, which is dedicated to storing information about non-animal tests. So if you perform a test for the, let's say, involvement of a chemical in one of the key events in a specific adverse outcome pathway, you can then store this information in the Euclid 6 application using OECD Harmonized Template 201. So that's the go-to place if we really then talk about chemicals. What are current day information systems that store this information? Obviously, the AOP Wiki is the place to go when you try to find AOP information. Different test method dissemination databases like the ones we run at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, but there are many others out there, give you information about which test methods are actually the applicable ones concerning certain key events. And all that makes sense when we tag the elements, the atomic elements in these different places, in these different storage facilities with the same ontology terms. So if we tag the methods in the test method database with the same ontology terms as we tag the key events in the adverse outcome pathway, and that is currently there is a publication about which ontology terms people should use when tagging their key events when drafting an AOP, and you see the publication link here. And if we use the same ontologies also for the chemical database dealing with the information about which chemical triggers which key event, and this ontology is currently being implemented, then by miracle of technology, we could actually complete the circle of which chemical tested by which method triggers with which key event in which adverse outcome pathway to which extent. And that is currently a project that many parties at OECD and other institutions are following different aspects and angles, and we are hoping that in the coming years we will arrive at the situation where all these ontologies fit together. I think that was everything I wanted to tell you today. And as Nathalie pointed out, please ask any questions you have in the chat box, and we will try to address as many of them as possible at the end of this event.
Many thanks, Clemens, for this very nice presentation. I think we can move on to the next speaker. So Dan is currently sharing his screen. Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be speaking about some adverse outcome pathway development tips. So as Clemens mentioned, AOPs are a way of organizing information and basically trying to extract information from the sea of existing knowledge, for example, in peer-reviewed literature, in various databases and online knowledge sources. The AOP developer plays the role of extracting this information and organizing it into these nice sushi boxes. So AOP developer really playing the role of the sushi chef and providing that information and knowledge to AOP consumers that want to use that information for various purposes. So really packaging it up and putting it in a palatable and easily digestible format. And so in this presentation today, I'm going to really focus on the AOP developer and some tips to improve practice of AOP development. So we're going to go through kind of the sushi chef guide to AOP development. So basically we're going to talk about starting with quality ingredients, considering presentation and palatability of the information, how to select the appropriate portion size so you're providing enough information but not too much, thinking about the indirect pairings and how those are important to providing the information, the value of fusion and collaboration in developing an AOP, and then finally thinking about the reputation and buzz around the AOPs that you as a developer may contribute to the wiki. So first of all, starting with quality ingredients, the AOP developer is really the front line, if you will, for the quality assurance of the knowledge that's being captured and synthesized in the AOP Wiki. And so it's an important role of the AOP developer to critically evaluate the primary sources that are being used to support your adverse outcome pathway. It's important to understand how weight of evidence for key event relationships and AOPs as a whole are evaluated and select information from these primary sources that best speaks to those criteria, and that those weight of evidence criteria were really the focus of the webinar 2 weeks ago. We talked about biological plausibility, how to evaluate things like dose-response concordance, temporal concordance, incidence concordance, and the essentiality of a key event in a pathway as all important types of information that help support inference or extrapolation along an AOP. And so if we understand these different elements of the weight of evidence and combine that with an understanding of the details of how the studies were done and how that affects evaluation of that evidence, that's a really important role that AOP developers play. And then ultimately we want to cite the sources of information that are used so that we have a transparent documentation so anybody else can go back and find those primary sources and do that evaluation for themselves. Because AOP development will typically involve literature review, it can also be helpful to document how that literature search and review was done. That helps provide transparency in terms of providing some confidence to the user that the literature search wasn't necessarily biased, that we didn't just cherry pick the data that supported our viewpoint, but rather took a very systematic approach. And it also provides greater efficiency. If somebody wants to update or add information, they have some understanding of how the initial searches were done, what kind of review of the literature was done in putting together the AOP. And so with this in mind, right now, the OECD and others involved are considering guidance on how to best document searches and reviews underlying AOP development. There's no current guidance on that, but again, it's something to think about as you go through the process of AOP development, trying to keep track of how the searches are done and to the extent you can, documenting it without it being too much of a burden. Second consideration relative to AOP development is how you present the information and make it palatable to the AOP consumer. So in many senses, AOPs are a communication tool. Providing strong scientific support for an adverse outcome pathway does little good if only those with highly specialized knowledge can actually understand the information that you're providing. And so the most effective AOP descriptions avoid the use of highly specialized technical jargon that a general sort of scientific audience may not understand. Should always strive to define relevant abbreviations that might be used. And strive for brevity. Nobody gets awards for the length of their AOP, but rather for the quality of the information and how well that information supports inference or extrapolation. And so try to keep it as brief as possible while providing the pertinent information, and organize that information in a way that really aids readability. So organizing the content into subsections, using bulleted numbers and lists, making effective use of tables and figures and illustrations, all things that we can do to make the information well organized and easy to follow. And the more that's true in the case of AOP development, the more likely it is that information will be used to support decision making. It's also important to give your consumers what they want. And so we've heard time and time again from stakeholders that folks want AOPs that have clear relevance to their decisions and that pertain to endpoints that are of interest to their programs or to their management goals. Also, I've gotten feedback that people want AOPs with clear links to test methods, because test methods are the source of data that we have for assessment of chemicals and other types of stressors. And so the more we can tie our key events to endpoints from specific test methods, the easier it is for users to understand how the data that they're seeing can interface with an AOP. And finally, developing AOPs that are relevant for environmentally realistic exposure scenarios. So as you're developing an AOP, you're really trying to evaluate whether the effects that are described in that AOP occur at environmentally relevant doses of the stressor, or potentially extrapolate to lower doses, or is this a mode of toxicity that's really going to only be relevant under artificial conditions or very high exposure concentrations that aren't likely to occur. The third consideration in developing AOPs is how to moderate the portion size. And I already alluded to the fact that we want to strive for brevity, not flood the user with so much information that it's hard to understand. Again, AOPs are intended to synthesize specialized knowledge and make it simple for non-experts to access and understand. And so to that end, we don't necessarily provide every detail and every nuance of the biology that might be known, but rather AOPs employ what could be referred to as a simple box strategy, where we make some simplification of the biological system that tries to represent the dominant processes that support inference, but ignores some of the details that aren't necessarily critical to use. And so we understand that in describing something like a key event relationship, here, for example, linking the release of the neurotransmitter dopamine to changes in locomotor behaviors, there's a tremendous amount of biology in terms of signaling pathways, in terms of activation of the nervous system and the musculature that's involved in this relationship. We understand that there's a lot of biology going on under the hood, but not all of that needs to be described in an AOP. And so part of the art of AOP development is really selecting what details to include and represent as key events, and what details to either ignore or to embed in the description of this relationship, and what the biological linkage is that underlies this relationship. And so in trying to decide how many key events to include or what detail with which to try and describe a pathway, we can sort of use this guidance for something you may have seen online or have heard about, which is trying to describe how you make toast. So if groups of people are asked how you make toast, often there's a tendency among people to try to break this down to a series of steps, usually ranging from about 4 to 8, maybe 5 to 10 different steps to describe a process like these. And so that's how we as humans can generally process information, break things down into a stepwise sort of description. And so we can use that as sort of a rough guide for how many key events to include in an AOP. We can also think about considerations like what's actually being frequently measured. Endpoints that are being frequently measured are good targets to include as key events. If it's not something that's already being measured, can it be readily measured? Is it something that we have the techniques, the technologies, the guidelines to do these measurements on a routine basis, or is it something that requires very specialized equipment or very specialized types of laboratories or experimentation in order to make the measurement? And if it can only be measured under very specific conditions, is it really necessary to include as a key event in the AOP? Once we've started with some of the endpoints that are most frequently measured, then the aim is usually to just flesh out with enough detail to establish biological plausibility. But again, bearing in mind we don't need every detail of the biology. And ultimately, we want to consider the level of specificity that's appropriate for linking to other key events already described in the wiki, and thus linking to the broader adverse outcome pathway network. And always remembering that other biological details can be embedded in the description of the key events or the key event relationships, even if they're not explicitly represented as key events in the AOP. Fourth, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about indirect pairings. So just like you might pair a bottle of wine with certain foods, in AOP development, it's important not to forget about the non-adjacent relationships. So we tend to describe AOPs as a stepwise or a sequence of different key events that lead from molecular initiating event to an adverse outcome. And so as AOP developers, there's a tendency to focus on these sequential steps. But in assembling weight of evidence to support an AOP, there are many cases where the most frequently measured endpoints may skip over steps in this pathway. And so, for example, for AOP-16, which focuses on the linkage between acetylcholinesterase inhibition and mortality, there's a tremendous weight of evidence in which this enzyme activity has been measured and mortality as an outcome has been measured. And this is true for hundreds of tests and chemicals. So there's a massive amount of correlation-based evidence that lies in this non-adjacent relationship. These intermediate events are only rarely measured in toxicological studies, but they provide important biological plausibility. They provide understanding of the mechanism by which this relationship happens. And so it's by the combination of this strong weight of correlation-based evidence in this non-adjacent key event relationship, along with the biological plausibility assembled through the more direct relationships, that provide really strong overall support for this AOP. The same can be said for quantitative understanding of the key event relationships. Again, our quantitative understanding may skip over some of these key events. So we have the example of AOP-25, where we have a number of non-adjacent key event relationships that have very good quantitative understanding. By coupling those together, even though we don't have that quantitative understanding defined for every link along the AOP, we can still span all the way from the molecular initiating event to a predicted adverse outcome based on the quantitative understanding of some of these indirect or non-adjacent relationships. This point I want to talk about is, again, the importance of fusion and collaboration. So as Clemens mentioned, there are different page types in the wiki. Key events and key event relationships are a page type that can be shared among multiple AOPs. And one of the intents of the wiki is that we don't have to build everything from scratch. If we're reusing, or if the biology we're describing involves a key event or a key event relationship that has been previously described, there's no need to start from scratch. We can build from those existing ingredients. We can maybe add to or modify those. But there are search tools within the wiki. So you can go to this key events menu or the key event relationship menu, can search those based on keywords and look to see whether there's something already in the wiki that you can build from or link to as you develop an AOP. So we strongly encourage that as part of the AOP development process. Likewise, AOP development does not have to be a lonely pursuit. You don't have to take on the development of the entire AOP all alone. You're encouraged to engage with other colleagues, both those you know as well as those you don't. And that's one of the advantages of developing an AOP on the wiki, is that others can see what you're contributing. They can see where there might be gaps or weaknesses in an AOP, and they can contribute information as well. And so different AOP developers have different perspectives, strengths, and expertise. And so bringing together a group can really strengthen and support good AOP development. Finally, speaking to Clemens' point about the AOP life cycle, by progressing through these different stages of maybe adding your AOP to the OECD work program, having it go through the EGMIST approval process, or maybe ultimately technical review and endorsement, is sort of like adding Michelin stars to your AOP. It provides the user with an understanding that this information has been vetted, it's been assessed for quality and technical accuracy, and potentially avoiding bias and that sort of thing. And so this can be an important way to show the value of the contribution you've made and make users comfortable in using that information. Likewise, as Clemens mentioned, we also want to get people involved in discussing the AOPs. So on each AOP page, you'll see a discussion button. You can click on this button and leave comments. So if you see something you like about an AOP, please leave a comment for that author to encourage them to keep developing or to provide another contribution to the AOP Wiki. If you see something that could be improved, leave a comment. The authors can see that. They can then assess whether they can make those improvements, and they can respond to that comment and say, hey, that was a great idea. I've made this change. Thanks for your contribution. So if you see a way to contribute, please leave a comment and get involved in helping to improve and develop the content you see in the wiki. So finally, after talking about the sushi chef's guide to AOP development, we'll get to a little bit of dessert. Just recap a little bit. AOPs, again, are a way of organizing information and presenting it in a way that is useful to consumers or users of that information. The AOP developer has an important role to play, both in assessing the quality of information, presenting it in a usable fashion, and really influencing how that information will be used. And AOP development is intended to be collaborative. So we encourage you to take advantage of the modular framework to build on existing content, to engage with collaborators with complementary expertise, and ultimately, just as you would if you're running a sushi restaurant, aim to please your consumer. And so with that, again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter them into the chat box, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, for this very nice analogy between the sushi preparation and AOP development. That was very clear. We can now move forward and invite our third speaker, Holly Mortensen. So, Holly, we can see your slides.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. So I've been asked to present an overview of some of the third-party tools to you today because these tools are useful for the AOP user. And so both in trying to retrieve information for AOP development, but also in trying to understand and characterize existing AOPs. Additionally, we'd like to see these tools incorporated into the AOP-KB in the near future, so your feedback is very important. Oops, click on the trigger there. So briefly, I'll go over 5 different tools. The first tool developed by Nancy Baker at the US EPA is actually, I'm going to explain that to you in 2 parts. The Chem AOP Lit tools. Basically, there are some Excel-based tools that are based on the medical subject heading or MESH terms, which are the National Library of Medicine, their controlled vocabulary used as a method for indexing articles in PubMed. So Nancy's developed a Chem AOP association tool as well as an abstract sifter. The second contributor is the AOP Help Finder. It's a tool implementing text mining as well, developed by Korean Adus Group, which has a combined positional text mining and some graph theory aspects to develop an association score between chemicals and AOP terms from the AOP Wiki. The AOP Explorer, we'll also discuss that, developed by Lyle Bagoon at the Army Corps of Engineers, and this is an AOP network visualizer. I'll also touch briefly on Opera, which is developed also at the Army Corps by Tyler Rycroft, and it helps identify third-party tools used to analyze chemical data at various levels. And lastly, I'll talk about my own tool, the EPA AOP database, which was developed to help users organize AOP information from the AOP Wiki that's associated with gene, pathway, and disease information so that users can better get an idea of the biological context of AOPs in the Wiki. So, as I mentioned, Nancy Baker's Lit tool. The first one is called Chem AOP Connect. And here the user's generally looking for chemical stressors associated with a given AOP. So currently Nancy has 8 AOPs available at the FTP site listed here. And in this example, AOP 27, cholestatic liver injury induced by inhibition of bile salt export pump. We can double click on each of the cells to get the PubMed literature support for each association between the chemical and the key event, and also get an overall sense with the heat map here on high versus low numbers of peer-reviewed journals. So these are journal counts and associating each chemical with a molecular initiating event, key event, or adverse outcome. So Nancy's second tool is called the abstract sifter. And here the input is a chemical list. The selection of the radio button at the top yields this output sort of here. You can click on each of the links and understand what the exact PubMed query is. And for steering, for example, there are 76 articles that are associated with the chemical, associating this chemical with DevTalks. So these key events and adverse outcomes are hand curated using the previous tool, the Chem AOP Connect. And again, if you go to the link here, there's a wealth of information available on how to use these pages. And Nancy's contact if you have any questions or you'd like to see specific AOPs or searches that are not already available. So the second contributor is this AOP Help Finder. And this, again, is a literature mining tool, but implementing a graph theory approach, which gives a score of associations between the chemical compounds and the AOP terms derived from the wiki. So it's not using mesh terms like Nancy's tool, but is implementing natural language processing to determine a text position. And so the 2 citations that are listed here are focusing on bisphenols to illustrate the tool. So I encourage you to go and look at those publications and learn more about this process. right, so the fourth tool is AOP Explorer. And AOP Explorer allows one to visualize pre-built AOPs created using the AOP ontology developed by Lyle Burgoon at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And there are currently 19 AOP networks included in this tool, which the user can view by using the tool's Cytoscape plugin. You can visualize and decorate these networks with your own data. As noted here, Lyle and the AOP Explorer team are asking for new AOP network submissions. So you can do this by adding your Cytoscape files to the AOP Explorer GitHub page, or simply contacting Lyle Burgoon at the address listed here. So AOP Opera is the fifth tool developed by Tyler Rycroft at the Army Corps of Engineers. Opera is kind of helps direct users to what level of input they have. For example, an uncharacterized chemical or a chemical with outcome information, for example, and leads you through the series of steps, and then basically directs you to other third-party tools to help analyze your data, such as QSAR, read across, or other pathway AOP tools for further analysis. So you can basically get chemical analog information or MIE and KE links to your data. And the last tool I'll tell you about today is my own tool. It's called the AOP database. And again, here the idea is that the user will want to understand information from the wiki, but not necessarily want to click through each and every page to get the information in an organized way. So the AOP database utilizes the XML file provided by the AOP Wiki team that Clemens mentioned, and links out to other gene, protein, chemical, pathway, and disease information so that users are able to quickly scan through or within and across AOPs to understand how they're related and the biological context that AOPs have in relation to other adverse outcomes. Currently, we have a simple autofill-enabled numeric and keyword search box, which accepts entree gene IDs, protein identifiers, AOP Wiki IDs, AOP stressor IDs, AOP Wiki names, Hugo identifiers, and chemical stressor names. So basically, you can enter in your information, and this is currently under development, and we're hoping to deploy it this summer. So just some quick examples of the basic search functions. Here I'm typing in AHR, pulling up a list of AOPs that are associated with AHR, and selecting on AOP 57. It brings up an AOP results page, which has 4 different tabs: gene, stressor, disease, and pathway. So the user for the gene page can select event type, entering in molecular, for example, and collating the list, navigating through, and basically selecting the export function. You can pull out an Excel spreadsheet with this information organized right to your desktop. So the second tab will pull up the stressor information. This is chemical stressor information that's pulled from the AOP Wiki and tagged with GTX IDs. The third tab is disease. Currently, we're using DisGenet, so the user can go in and select, modify the level of probability of association between the gene and the disease here. Again, limiting their list and exporting, the ability to export that to Excel file. And lastly, the pathway tab Let's see here. My example is to basically go in and modify based on taxonomy. So here we're selecting human and limiting our list and pulling that out. We've also enabled a batch download feature, the format of which we're currently optimizing now to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But in this example, a user can upload a list of cast numbers and select AOP as the data output and pull down essentially a CSV file, which they can open up in Excel and collating information that lists the chemical cast, associated entree targets, and event information, stressors, and DSS tox IDs. And so that is the last I have of the tools. And if you have any questions, please direct them to Nathalie. And thanks for listening.
Many thanks, Holly, for this nice presentation of what will be the new tools in the near future. I will share a few slides to conclude. I would like to thank our three speakers today. Thank you very much for your presentations. This was very useful information to developers of AOPs, and I hope that everyone has found this inspiring and that you are now ready to step in and participate in this collaborative effort. So a few concluding remarks from my side before we move on to the question and answer session. And again, please feel free to send your questions via the chat box. So to conclude, there is a great interest for AOPs, and as a consequence, tools are being developed as just presented to explore AOPs further. And as mentioned by Clemens, the AOP Knowledge Base will soon undergo an extensive revision, and AOP users are being consulted. We are actually in the process of capturing specification requirements and developing new features for the next version of the AOP-KB. It's the AOP-KB 2.0, and in the process of identifying potential integrations of these new tools. So your feedback is welcome, and if you use these tools and have feedback to provide, it can be which tools you're using, what is useful to you, what may be missing. You are welcome to contact the Secretariat or Clemens Wittwehr directly, so that your feedback is considered in the development of the new AOP knowledge base. And with this series of 3 webinars over the last 9 months, our objective has been to encourage collaboration in AOP development, to stimulate crowdsourcing and increase the development of AOP networks. At the same time, we have also strengthened our collaboration with several scientific societies and their affiliated journals, and we anticipate that such collaboration will be of mutual benefit to scientists and to the AOP program in the future. So on that note, I will stop sharing to see if we have received questions. Okay, I have one question before we close. Have the guidance for literature search at OECD started? So this is a question for Dan. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit about the guidance for literature search.
Okay, so yes. So within the OECD Extended Advisory Group for Molecular Screening and Toxicogenomics, there is a team involved in the development of the handbook, which is basically guidance on the AOP development. That group has a task team that is considering how to integrate some of the principles and tools that are used in systematic reviews into the AOP development process. We're carefully considering how best to integrate those tools because we don't want to create additional documentation burden on the developers. We know that people are volunteering their time and their energy to develop AOPs. We don't want to make that process onerous, but at the same time, if there are things that we can do to improve the transparency and the understanding of the quality of the information by documenting how the searches are done, we'd like to integrate that if we can do that in a streamlined fashion. So we have a work group that's focused on that right now. They've just started kind of their deliberations and consideration of this issue, but we hope to be developing guidance on that over the next year.
Thank you very much, Dan. I see no other question. So, yeah, if you wish to know more, you are invited to visit our website, recording of past webinars and training material. You have the links provided here on this slide, and so you can contact us directly, Magda Sahana and Nathalie Delrue, and we'll be happy to address any question or provide any clarification that you may have. So I would like to thank our speakers for taking the time to guide us, diving into the core of the AOP knowledge base. I would also like to thank all the participants. I hope you found it useful and that it stimulated the wish to start developing AOPs. So I wish you a nice day and hoping to increase more collaboration in the future. Goodbye, thank you.